The dusty figure limping along the sun-baked country road had been ignored by 38 vehicles since sunrise. Gleaming pickup trucks whose drivers pretended to check their phones. Family minivans that swerved wide around him in the empty lane. Even the county sheriff had slowed down, taken a long look, then accelerated away, dust billowing in his wake. The man in the worn denim jacket and mud-stained boots kept his arm raised weakly, but each passing driver seemed to register something troubling about his disheveled appearance and hurried past. No one wanted the responsibility of this stranger. In the middle of nowhere. No one except for one single mother running a struggling farm, who had every reason to drive past but couldn't ignore a fellow human being in need. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Eleanor Ellie Sutton gripped the steering wheel of her ancient Ford F-150 as she approached the Hitchhiker. The truck's once vibrant red paint had faded to a dull rust color after 15 years of hard farm work. The dashboard was covered in a fine layer of the same soil that paid her bills when the bills got paid at all. The check engine light had been glowing for 3 months, but engine repairs were somewhere far down on her list of priorities, below the leaking roof, Sammy's school supplies, and the irrigation system that kept failing during the worst drought in 40 years. A pile of invoices sat in the passenger seat, each one stamped with various versions of past due. The Millridge County Bank had given her a 6-month extension on the farm loan after Thomas died, but those 6 months had come and gone, and now they were sending letters with words like foreclosure and proceedings. She was heading home from another frustrating meeting where the loan officer, a man 10 years younger than her 42 years, had explained in a condescending tone that the bank couldn't extend charity indefinitely. As if it were charity. She wanted, and not just a chance to keep the family farm that had been in Thomas's family for 4 generations. She glanced in the rearview mirror at the sleeping form of her 12-year-old son, Sammy, his head leaning against the window, dark curls falling across his forehead. The morning spent sitting in the bank lobby had exhausted him almost as much as it had exhausted her. Single parenting was hard enough without dragging your child to financial meetings, where adults discussed your impending destitution in polite, measured terms. The Hitchhiker's form grew larger in her windshield. She should drive past. Everyone knew you didn't pick up strangers these days, especially not when you had your child in the car. The rational part of her brain listed all the reasons to accelerate. Serial killers, carjackers, escaped convicts, the vulnerability of a woman alone with her child on a remote road. But another part of her, the part that had been raised on a farm where helping neighbors wasn't charity, but survival, couldn't ignore the man's obvious distress. He was limping badly, favoring his right leg, and even from a distance, she could see the exhaustion in his posture. The temperature was pushing 103 degrees, and heat mirages shimmered off the asphalt ahead. In this heat, without water, a person wouldn't last long. Mom? Sammy's voice, thick with sleep, came from the back seat. Why are we slowing down? Ellie hadn't even realized her foot had eased off the gas. There's someone who might need help, honey. A hitchhiker? Dad always said never to stop for hitchhikers. Thomas's voice seemed to echo in the truck cab, one of his many safety lectures replaying in her mind. He had been cautious to a fault, always preparing for the worst-case scenario. Your father also said to help people in true need, Ellie replied, though Thomas had indeed been clear about hitchhikers specifically. But Thomas had never faced the possibility of losing everything either. Something about seeing someone else in distress made her own problems seem temporarily manageable. As she drew closer, she could see the man more clearly. Mid-30s with a neatly trimmed beard that contrasted with his otherwise disheveled appearance. His clothes were expensive but dirty, as if he'd been wearing them for days. Despite the heat, he wore a suit jacket, though he'd removed the tie, which protruded from his pocket. Most striking was the leather briefcase he clutched tightly, incongruous with his desperate situation. "Stay in the truck, Sammy," she said, as she pulled onto the shoulder about 20 feet ahead of the man. "Lock the doors if I'm not back in 2 minutes. Mom!" Sammy's voice held a note of panic. "This isn't safe." "I'll be careful," she promised, though she wasn't entirely sure why she was doing this. Maybe because after months of being on the receiving end of help church food drives, sympathetic extensions from creditors, neighbors watching Sammy while she worked extra shifts at the diner in town, it felt good to be the one offering assistance for once. She stepped out into the wall of heat, the air so dry it seemed to pull moisture from her body with each breath. The hitchhiker had stopped moving and was watching her approach with an expression she couldn't quite read. "You need help?" She called when she was still several yards away, close enough to communicate, but far enough to turn and run if necessary. The man shifted his weight, grimacing as he did so. "Twisted my ankle about 5 miles back," he said, his voice surprisingly cultured with a hint of an accent she couldn't place. "My car broke down and I thought I could walk to the next town, but—" He gestured to his leg. "Nearest town is Millridge, and that's 15 miles south," Ellie said. "You're headed the wrong direction." The man closed his eyes briefly. "Of course I am," he muttered. "Just my luck today." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Something about his resigned tone made her relax slightly. This wasn't a predator looking for victims. This was someone having a genuinely terrible day. She recognized the expression. She'd seen it in her own mirror often. Enough over the past 18 months. "I can give you a ride to Millridge," she offered. "There's a mechanic there who might be able to help with your car." The man's face showed surprise, then relief. "Thank you. I've been out here for hours." "Nobody stops anymore, do they?" There was a weariness in his voice that went beyond physical exhaustion. "I'm Eleanor Sutton," she said, not approaching any closer. "That's my son Sammy in the truck." "James Harrington," he replied with a slight nod that seemed almost formal. "I appreciate your kindness, Miss Sutton." "Mrs.," she corrected automatically, then felt foolish. Her marital status hardly mattered to a stranger, and technically, she was a widow, not a wife anymore. But the wedding ring still sat on her finger, a habit she couldn't break after 18 months. "Mrs. Sutton," he amended. "I don't want to impose, especially with your son in the vehicle." The consideration in his voice helped ease her remaining apprehension. A predator would be pushing to get in the truck, not expressing concern for her child. "Can you make it to the truck, or do you need help?" "I can manage," he said, taking a tentative step and wincing. His limp was pronounced but not incapacitating. Ellie returned to the truck and rolled down Sammy's window. "We're going to give this man a ride to town," she explained. "His car broke down and he hurt his ankle." Sammy's eyes were wide with apprehension. "Mom, are you sure?" She wasn't sure at all, but the alternative was leaving someone to potentially die of heat stroke on a day when the weatherman had warned people to stay indoors. "It'll be fine," she said with more confidence than she felt. "He's injured, and we're just giving him a ride to Mac's garage." By the time James reached the truck, sweat was pouring down his face despite the relatively short walk. Ellie opened the passenger door and quickly gathered the bills and notices into a messy pile, which she shoved into the glove compartment. "Apologies for the state of me," James said as he carefully climbed in, placing his briefcase on his lap. "I've had a rather eventful 24 hours. "Don't worry about it," Ellie said, turning the key. The engine coughed twice before catching, and the ancient air conditioning wheezed to life, pushing lukewarm air through the vents. It's not exactly luxury transportation. As they pulled back onto the road, Ellie snuck glances at their passenger. Up close, his clothes were definitely expensive. The kind Thomas used to point out in magazines with a mixture of admiration and scorn. $200 for a shirt? Does it wash itself too? He'd say. James's watch alone probably cost more than she made in 3 months at the diner. Thank you again, James said, breaking the silence. I was beginning to think I'd have to spend the night out there. Where were you headed? Ellie asked. Chicago, eventually, James replied. I was taking the scenic route. Thought I'd see some of the real America. He gave a small, self-deprecating laugh. Getting stranded in the middle of nowhere wasn't part of the itinerary. Your car just stopped working? Sammy asked from the back seat, curiosity temporarily overcoming his wariness. James turned slightly to include the boy in the conversation. Started making a terrible noise, then smoke started coming from under the hood. I pulled over, and that was that. I know absolutely nothing about engines, I'm afraid. My dad knew everything about engines, Sammy said proudly. He could fix anything. A flash of pain crossed Ellie's face, there and gone in an instant. He sounds like a very capable man, James said gently. He was, Sammy said, his voice dropping. He died last year. Well, not last year, the year before. 18 months ago. I'm very sorry to hear that, James said, and there was genuine empathy in his voice. An uncomfortable silence filled the truck. Ellie forced herself to focus on the road ahead, the familiar landscape of dried cornfields stretching to the horizon. The drought had turned what should have been vibrant green into a depressing yellow-brown. Many of the farms they passed showed signs of the same struggle, equipment sitting idle, fields partially planted or unharvested, for sale signs that had been up so long they'd faded in the sun. You have a farm? James asked, nodding toward a callus on her hand as she gripped the steering wheel. 5th generation, she said with a touch of pride she couldn't suppress, even knowing that she might be the one to lose it. Though this drought's making it near impossible to keep going. Mom grows the best corn in the county, Sammy chimed in. When there's enough water, he added as an afterthought. Specialty corn, Ellie explained. Heirloom varieties for specialty markets. It was my husband's project initially. He believed there was a market for something beyond the commercial hybrids. And was there? James asked. Yes, she said. Simply, but scaling up takes capital, and then the drought hit, and then Thomas. She trailed off. Anyway, we're getting by. James nodded but didn't press further, and she was grateful for that. The last thing she needed was to explain her financial situation to a complete stranger, no matter how sympathetic he seemed. As they approached the outskirts of Mill Ridge, the landscape transitioned from farmland to the scattered buildings that constituted the small town. Mill Ridge had never been prosperous, but the drought had hit it particularly hard. The main street featured more empty storefronts than active businesses, and the few people visible moved with the slow, deliberate pace of those conserving energy in the heat. Mac's garage is just up ahead on the right, Ellie said, pointing to a weathered building with a faded sign reading, Mill Ridge Auto Repair. She pulled into the gravel lot and parked near the office entrance. Mac's honest, at least. He won't overcharge you for unnecessary repairs. I appreciate the recommendation, James said. He made no immediate move to exit the truck, instead staring at the garage with an odd expression. Is something wrong? Ellie asked. James seemed to come back to himself. No, just calculating logistics. My car is miles from here, and I need to be in Chicago by tomorrow afternoon for a very important meeting. Mac might be able to send a tow truck, Ellie suggested. Perhaps, James said, though he didn't sound convinced. In any case, you've been extraordinarily kind. I can take it from here. He reached for the door handle, then paused. Would you and your son allow me to buy you lunch as a thank you? I noticed a diner as we drove in. The Bluebird, Sammy said helpfully. Mom works there on weekends, James smiled. The Bluebird it is then, if you have the time, of course. Ellie hesitated. They needed to get back to the farm, there were chores waiting, and a meeting with a potential buyer for their modest harvest was scheduled for later that afternoon. But Sammy hadn't eaten since breakfast, and her own stomach was grumbling. Besides, there was something about James that made her curious. Maybe it was the contrast between his obvious wealth and his current disheveled state. Or maybe it was just that talking to someone new made a nice change from the familiar faces of Millridge, where everyone knew her situation and regarded her with varying degrees of pity. "I suppose we have time for a quick lunch," she conceded. The Bluebird Diner sat in the center of Millridge's main street, its blue neon sign one of the few bright spots in the otherwise faded town. Inside, the air conditioning was working overtime, creating a pleasant respite from the heat. The lunch crowd was sparse, another sign of the town's struggles. "Ellie," called Diane, the owner and head waitress, a woman in her 60s with dyed red hair and reading glasses perpetually perched on her head. "Didn't expect to see you today. And who's this?" "This is James," Ellie said, suddenly aware that she didn't know his last name. "His car broke down outside town, and we gave him a ride to Max. Harrington," James supplied. "James Harrington. Pleasure to meet you." Diane's eyes narrowed slightly as she assessed him, then softened as she noticed his limp. "Well, you picked the right person to help you. Ellie's got the biggest heart in the county. Booth in the back, okay?" They settled into a worn vinyl booth, and Diane brought menus and water without being asked. James set his briefcase on the seat beside him, keeping one hand resting on it even as he perused the menu. "The special's usually good," Ellie offered. "Diane makes everything from scratch." James nodded, studying the menu with the same intensity someone might give to a fine dining establishment in a major city. "I think I'll try the meatloaf special," he decided, closing the menu. "Cheeseburger." "For me," Sammy said instantly, his usual order whenever they ate out, which wasn't often. "Make that too," Ellie added, "and please, this is our treat. You're the one having a rough day." James shook his head firmly. "I insist. It's the least I can do after you rescued me from the side of the road." There was something in his tone that suggested arguing would be pointless, so Ellie simply nodded her thanks. As they waited for their food, James asked Sammy about school, showing genuine interest in the boy's description of his science project on drought-resistant crops. The conversation flowed surprisingly easily, with none of the awkwardness Ellie had expected. There was something about James that put her at ease despite the unusual circumstances of their meeting. Their food arrived quickly, and they ate with the comfortable silence of people who don't feel compelled to fill every moment with conversation. Ellie found herself studying James when he wasn't looking. There was a weariness about him that went beyond his current predicament, a sadness in his eyes that reminded her of what she sometimes saw in her own mirror. "So what takes you to Chicago?" she asked eventually. "Business?" James took a sip of water before answering. "Yes, a business meeting that could determine the future of my company. I started a small tech firm about 5 years ago, and we've been approached by a larger corporation interested in acquiring us." "That sounds exciting," Ellie said, though she knew nothing about the tech world. "It's complicated," James replied. "The offer is substantial, but accepting it would mean significant changes for our employees. I've been driving around for days, trying to clear my head and make the right decision. And instead, you ended up stranded in the middle of nowhere," Ellie said with a small smile. "The universe has a sense of humor, it seems," James agreed, returning her smile. After they finished eating, James excused himself to use the restroom. As soon as he was out of earshot, Sammy leaned forward. "Mom, he seems nice, but his watch probably costs more than our truck. What's he doing hitchhiking in the middle of nowhere?" "His car broke down, honey," Ellie reminded him. "That can happen to anyone, rich or poor." "But why was he on that back road? Nobody takes that route unless they live around here." Ellie had been wondering the same thing but hadn't wanted to interrogate someone who was already having a difficult day. He said he was taking the scenic route. Through Millridge County? Sammy's skepticism was clear. There's nothing scenic about dried-up cornfields. Before Ellie could respond, she noticed James returning, moving carefully to avoid putting too much weight on his injured ankle. He had tidied himself up somewhat, his face freshly washed and his hair combed back with wet fingers. "I've just spoken with the garage owner," he said as he slid back into the booth. "He can send someone for my car, but the earliest he can look at it would be tomorrow afternoon. Apparently, there's quite a backlog." "That's Mac for you, Ellie." Sighed. "He's good, but he works at his own pace." James nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Is there a hotel in town where I might stay tonight?" Ellie and Sammy exchanged glances. "The Millridge Inn closed down last year," Ellie said. "Nearest hotel is in Riversend, about 30 miles south." "I see," James said, frowning slightly. "And I don't suppose there's a car rental agency nearby?" "Nearest one's in Riversend, too," Ellie confirmed. "There's a bus that goes there, but it only runs on Mondays and Thursdays." "And today is Tuesday," James said with a sigh. "Perfect." Ellie found herself speaking before she'd fully thought through the implications. "We have a spare room. It's nothing fancy, but you're welcome to stay the night if you need to." Sammy's eyes widened in surprise, and Ellie immediately questioned her own judgment. Was she really inviting a complete stranger to stay in their home? James looked equally surprised by the offer. "That's incredibly generous, but I couldn't impose on you like that." "It's no imposition," Ellie said, though part of her was screaming that this was a terrible idea. "We're headed back to the farm anyway, and it's closer to where your car broke down. Might make things easier for the tow truck tomorrow." "If you're certain," James said hesitantly. "I am," Ellie said with more confidence than she felt. "It's what neighbors do around here." "We're not neighbors, Mom," Sammy pointed out, his practical nature asserting itself. "We don't even know where he lives." "Boston, actually," James said with a small smile. "Though I grew up in London originally. Moved to the States for university. And never left." That explained the hint of an accent Ellie had detected earlier. "Well, consider yourself an honorary neighbor for the day," she said. "The offer stands if you want it." James studied her face for a long moment, as if trying to discern her true motives. Whatever he saw there must have reassured him, because he nodded slowly. "Thank you," he said simply. "I accept." As they left the diner, Ellie felt a mixture of doubt and a strange certainty. Thomas would have thought she was crazy, inviting a stranger into their home. But something told her that James Harrington was exactly what he appeared to be, a businessman having a very bad day. Not a threat to her or Sammy. What she couldn't possibly know was how completely her life was about to change, or that the briefcase James clutched so protectively contained something that would soon become the center of a controversy affecting them both. The midday heat hit them like a physical force as they exited the diner. James winced slightly as he put weight on his injured ankle. "We should get some ice for that," Ellie said, noticing his discomfort. "And maybe some painkillers." "I'll be fine," James assured her, but the tightness around his eyes suggested otherwise. "There's a pharmacy 2 doors down," Ellie insisted. "It'll only take a minute." James relented, and they made a quick stop at Miller's Pharmacy, where Ellie purchased an elastic bandage, a cold pack, and some over-the-counter pain relievers. Mr. Miller, the elderly pharmacist who had known Ellie since she was a child, raised his eyebrows at the sight of James but limited his questions to a polite inquiry about his ankle. Back in the truck, with the AC struggling against the heat, Ellie noticed James checking his phone frequently. "Signal's spotty around here," she warned him. "Gets worse the further out of town we go." James nodded absently, typing something quickly before putting the phone away. "Just letting my colleague know about the delay." She can reschedule tomorrow's meeting if necessary, though I'd rather not miss it. The drive back to the farm took them along winding country roads, past fields showing the same signs of drought stress they'd seen earlier. Ellie pointed out landmarks as they went. The old Simmons place, abandoned 5 years ago when the family moved to Ohio. The creek that used to provide irrigation water but had been reduced to a trickle. The water tower that served as the unofficial symbol of the county. Your farm is quite isolated, James observed as they turned onto a narrow dirt road that seemed to lead nowhere. That's the way we like it, Ellie said. Thomas used to say that good fences and long driveways make for peaceful farming. And do they? Ellie considered the question. They make for quiet at least. Peace is something else entirely. The Sutton farm came into view as they crested a small hill. The main house was a 2-story farmhouse that had been added onto over generations, creating an asymmetrical but charming structure. The white paint was peeling in places, and the front porch sagged slightly, but flower boxes under the windows added cheerful splashes of color. Behind the house stood a large barn, its red paint faded to a soft pink, and several outbuildings in various states of repair. Fields stretched out on all sides, the corn stunted by lack of water, but still recognizably the lifeblood of the farm. "Home sweet home," Ellie said as she pulled up in front of the house. "It's not much, but it's ours. For now, at least," she added under her breath. "It's lovely," James said, and there was genuine appreciation in his voice. "There's something honest about a place like this." Ellie smiled despite herself. "That's one way of looking at it. Another is that it's a money pit that demands constant attention and gives increasingly diminishing returns. Mom's worried about losing the farm," Sammy said matter-of-factly as he climbed out of the truck. "The bank says we have to pay a lot of money or they'll take it away." "Sammy!" Ellie's cheeks flushed with embarrassment. "Mr. Harrington doesn't need to hear about our financial problems." "It's all right," James said gently. "I understand financial pressure all too well. My company has been through some difficult periods." "It's just a temporary cash flow issue," Ellie said, the phrase she'd repeated to herself countless times over the past year. "Once we get through this drought and can scale up the specialty corn operation again, things will turn around." James nodded, not offering platitudes or advice, which Ellie appreciated. Everyone in town had an opinion on what she should do with the farm: sell it, lease it, convert it to solar panels, as if she hadn't considered every possible option 100 times over. "Let me show you to the guest room," she said, changing the subject. "Then I need to check on the irrigation system. One of the pumps was making a strange noise this morning." The guest room was small but clean, with a double bed covered in a handmade quilt, a simple wooden dresser, and a window overlooking the eastern fields. It had been Thomas's office originally, converted to a guest room after his death when Ellie found she couldn't bear to sit among his things. Now the only reminder of its former purpose was the sturdy desk in the corner, its surface cleared of the papers and farm journals that had once cluttered it. "The bathroom is down the hall," Ellie explained. "Towels are in the closet there. Make yourself at home. We usually eat dinner around 6. "Thank you," James said, setting his briefcase on the desk. "I don't know how to express my gratitude adequately." "No need," Ellie said, feeling suddenly awkward. "Just doing what anyone would do." "But they didn't," James pointed out quietly. "You were the only one who stopped." Their eyes met for a moment, and Ellie felt a strange connection, a recognition of something shared between them, despite their vastly different lives. "I should check that pump," she said, breaking the moment. "Sammy can show you around if you're interested, once you've rested." As she left the house, Ellie wondered again at the impulse that had led her to invite a stranger into their home. There was something about James that intrigued her, not romantically, she quickly told herself, but as a puzzle to be solved. He was clearly successful, based on his clothes and manner, yet there was a sadness about him that suggested money hadn't brought him happiness. The afternoon passed in a rhythm familiar to Ellie. The irrigation pump needed a new gasket, a simple fix but one that took time she could ill afford. The potential buyer for their corn harvest called to reschedule, citing transportation issues, but probably just stalling in hopes of negotiating a lower price. Sammy helped with chores, his usual complaints about the heat and the work noticeably absent, probably because he was showing off for their guest. James had indeed rested, icing his ankle as Ellie had suggested, but by late afternoon, he emerged from the house and made his way carefully to where Ellie was checking moisture levels in the soil. "Your son gave me the tour," he said, looking out over the fields. "He's very knowledgeable about farming for someone so young. He's been helping since he could walk," Ellie said proudly. Thomas believed children should understand where food comes from and the work that goes into producing it. "A wise philosophy," James agreed. "Many of my colleagues in Boston have children who think vegetables originate in grocery store bins." Ellie laughed. "Sammy would set them straight pretty quickly." "He mentioned your specialty corn," James said. "He seems quite proud of it." "It was Thomas's project initially," Ellie explained. "He believed there was a market for heirloom varieties that offered better flavor and nutritional profiles than commercial hybrids. He was right, too. We had contracts with several high-end restaurants in Chicago and even a few in New York before." She trailed off, the familiar ache of loss resurfacing. "Before he passed away," James finished gently. Ellie nodded. "I've tried to keep it going, but between the drought and the logistics of distribution, it's been challenging. The regular corn pays the bills barely, but the specialty varieties were our path to sustainability. Have you considered direct-to-consumer marketing? Subscription boxes, farmers markets in affluent areas?" "Of course," Ellie said, trying not to sound defensive. "But that requires infrastructure, refrigerated transport, packaging facilities, marketing budgets. Things we don't have." James nodded thoughtfully. "I apologize. I didn't mean to suggest you hadn't explored your options. It's an occupational hazard. I tend to look for solutions to problems, sometimes when people aren't asking for them." "No offense taken," Ellie assured him. "Honestly, it's refreshing to talk business strategy instead of receiving pitying looks or suggestions that I should just sell to one of the big agricultural corporations." "Is that a possibility?" James asked cautiously. "Technically, yes. I've had offers," Ellie admitted. "But this land has been in Thomas's family for generations. I can't be the one to let it go, not without trying everything possible first. Sammy deserves the chance to decide for himself whether he wants to continue the legacy when he's older." The conversation was interrupted by Sammy calling from the porch that dinner was ready. He had taken it upon himself to prepare a simple meal of pasta with vegetables from their garden, a task he had become surprisingly adept at over the past year. Dinner was a relaxed affair, with conversation flowing easily between farming, technology, and Sammy's enthusiastic descriptions of his school projects. James proved to be a good listener, asking thoughtful questions and sharing stories of his own childhood in England and his early days as an entrepreneur. "So why were you really on that back road?" Sammy asked suddenly, his curiosity finally getting the better of him. "Nobody takes that route unless they live around here." "Sammy," Ellie admonished, "that's not polite." James waved away her concern. "It's a fair question. The truth is, I was deliberately taking the longest route possible to Chicago. I needed time to think before this meeting tomorrow." "About selling your company?" Ellie asked. James nodded. "It's more complicated than a simple acquisition. The offer is generous, life-changing money for me and my team. But the acquiring company has a different vision for our technology, one that I'm not entirely comfortable with." "What kind of technology is it?" Sammy asked. "We develop algorithms that help predict consumer behavior," James explained. "Initially, we created them to help small businesses compete with larger corporations by better understanding their customers. But the company looking to acquire us wants to use the technology for more invasive purposes, like spying on people, Sammy suggested with the directness of youth. James smiled ruefully. Not quite that dramatic, but not entirely off base either. They want to use our predictive models to influence purchasing decisions in ways I find ethically questionable. So why consider selling at all? Ellie asked. James sighed. Financial reality. We've reached a point where we need significant capital to expand, and without it, we'll likely be overtaken by competitors anyway. My team has worked incredibly hard, and many of them have families to support. The acquisition would secure their futures. At the cost of your principles, Ellie observed. Exactly, James said, looking at her with appreciation for her understanding. Hence the scenic route and the need for clarity. After dinner, as the sun began to set, they moved to the porch. The heat of the day gave way to a pleasant warmth, and a slight breeze stirred the air. The western sky blazed with color oranges, pinks, and purples, painting a spectacular tableau. I'd forgotten how beautiful sunsets can be out here, James sighed, leaning against the porch railing. In Boston, buildings block the horizon. It's one of the compensations for the hard work, Ellie agreed. That and the stars. You should see them once it gets fully dark, no light pollution for miles. They fell into comfortable silence, watching as the colors deepened and then slowly faded. Sammy had gone inside to finish some summer reading for school, leaving the adults alone on the porch. Thank you again for your hospitality, James said eventually. It's been illuminating being here. Puts things in perspective. How so? Ellie asked. James gestured toward the fields. You're fighting to preserve something meaningful. Something with history and purpose. My dilemma seems somewhat trivial in comparison. I wouldn't say that, Ellie replied. Ethics matter wherever you encounter them. Thomas used to say that how we handle the small moral questions determines how we'll face the big ones. Your husband sounds like he was a wise man. He was, Ellie said softly. Not perfect, but wise about the things that mattered. The conversation drifted to lighter topics as darkness fell completely. James shared amusing stories about cultural misunderstandings during his early years in America, and Ellie recounted tales of farm life that had him laughing until tears came to his eyes. It was nearly 10 o'clock when Ellie finally stood, stretching. Tired muscles. I should turn in. Morning comes early on a farm, regardless of guests. Of course, James said. I wouldn't want to disrupt your routine. You're welcome to stay up and enjoy the stars, Ellie offered. There's iced tea in the refrigerator if you get thirsty. Thank you. I think I will for just a little while. As Ellie headed inside, she found herself puzzling over James Harrington. He was unlike anyone she'd met before, cultured and successful, yet approachable and genuinely interested in their small-scale farm operation. There was a depth to him that belied the stereotype of the tech entrepreneur, a thoughtfulness that reminded her in some ways of Thomas. She checked on Sammy, who was already asleep, his summer reading book open on his chest. Gently removing it and turning off his light, she placed a kiss on his forehead and whispered goodnight. The morning brought a crispness to the air that hinted at the coming fall, a welcome relief from the previous day's oppressive heat. Ellie woke before her alarm, an ingrained habit from years of farm life. The familiar sounds of the house settling around her provided comfort as she lay in the pre-dawn darkness, mentally cataloging the day's tasks. The irrigation system needed checking again. The north field required inspection for signs of pest damage, and she needed to call the bank and try once more to negotiate an extension on the loan. Then she remembered their visitor and the unusual circumstances that had brought him to their home. James Harrington, with his expensive clothes and cultured accent, seemed wildly out of place in their modest farmhouse, yet there had been something in his manner that put her at ease, a genuineness that couldn't be faked. Ellie dressed quickly in well-worn jeans and a faded blue work shirt. The morning chores wouldn't wait, guest or no guest. She moved quietly through the hallway, pausing briefly outside the guest room door. No sound came from within. James was likely still asleep, unused to the early hours kept by farming families. Downstairs, she was surprised to find the coffee already made, its rich aroma filling the kitchen. A note sat propped against the pot. Couldn't sleep. Went for a walk to watch the sunrise. Hope you don't mind the coffee, Jay. Ellie smiled despite herself. There was something oddly endearing about a city businessman seeking out a rural sunrise. She poured herself a cup. The coffee was stronger than she usually made it, but good, and stepped onto the porch to survey her domain in the growing light. The sight that greeted her was unexpected. James stood near the edge of the eastern field, his figure silhouetted against the pink-gold horizon. But he wasn't alone. Sammy was with him, gesturing animatedly as he pointed to different areas of the farm. Even from a distance, Ellie could see her son's enthusiasm, his body language open and excited in a way she hadn't witnessed in months. She sipped her coffee, watching the interaction with mixed emotions. Sammy had withdrawn after Thomas's death, retreating into books about farming and agriculture, speaking mostly in facts and figures rather than expressing his feelings. Seeing him animated again brought both joy and a pang of sadness that it took a stranger to bring this side of him out again. As the sun cleared the horizon, James noticed her on the porch and waved. Sammy followed suit, his wave more energetic, before the two of them began walking back toward the house. "Mom, Mr. Harrington knows about drip irrigation systems," Sammy called as they approached. "The kind that use computers to deliver exactly the right amount of water to each plant." "Does he now?" Ellie replied, raising an eyebrow at James. "I didn't realize tech entrepreneurs were also agricultural experts." James looked slightly embarrassed. "Hardly an expert. One of our early clients was an agricultural technology startup. I learned a bit about modern farming methods through that relationship. He says we could save like 30% of our water with the right system," Sammy continued excitedly. "And it would pay for itself in 3 years." "I'm sure it would," Ellie said, trying to keep the frustration from her voice. "But those systems cost tens of thousands of dollars to install. Money we don't have." James winced slightly, seeming to realize he'd inadvertently touched a sore point. "I apologize. I didn't mean to suggest solutions that aren't practical for your situation." "It's fine," Ellie said, softening her tone. "Sammy, can you go feed the chickens before breakfast? And make sure to collect all the eggs this time." Once Sammy had headed off toward the chicken coop, Ellie turned back to James. "Thank you for the coffee. You're up early for someone on vacation." "Force of habit," James replied. "I rarely sleep past 5, even on weekends. And it seemed a shame to waste such a beautiful morning." He gestured toward the fields, now fully illuminated by the morning sun. "Your son is quite remarkable. His knowledge of agriculture is impressive for his age." "He's his father's son," Ellie said, unable to keep a note of pride from her voice. "Thomas started teaching him about farming practically from the cradle. After he died." She paused, collecting herself. "After he died, Sammy threw himself into learning everything he could. I think it makes him feel closer to his dad." James nodded, understanding in his eyes. "My father passed when I was 15. I did something similar with his books on architecture, though he was an accountant by profession." The shared experience of loss created a moment of connection between them, broken by the rumbling of James's stomach. Ellie laughed. "I guess that's my cue to start breakfast. How do you feel about farm fresh eggs?" "Sounds perfect," James said, with a smile. "Can I help? You can set the table. Plates are in the cabinet by the sink." They worked together comfortably, moving around the kitchen as if they'd done it many times before. James was surprisingly adept, finding items without needing to ask, anticipating what she might need next. By the time Sammy returned with a basket of eggs, breakfast preparations were well underway. "Wow, it smells amazing in here," Sammy said, placing the basket on the counter. "We got 8 eggs today, Mom." "Perfect timing," Ellie said, taking 4 of the eggs for their breakfast. She cracked them into a bowl, added a splash of milk, and whisked them together before pouring the mixture into a hot skillet. The sound of sizzling filled the kitchen as James placed toast on 3 plates and Sammy poured orange juice. "Is Max sending someone for your car today?" Ellie asked as they sat down to eat. James nodded. "He said they'd try to get to it this morning. I've left him the location and details." He hesitated, then added, "I was hoping I might impose on your hospitality for one more favor. Could you possibly give me a ride to the bus station in Riversend? I checked, and there's an afternoon bus that could get me to Chicago late tonight." "Of course," Ellie said, though she felt an unexpected twinge of disappointment that he would be leaving so soon. "I need to go into town anyway to meet with the bank manager." "Another discussion about the loan?" Sammy asked, his voice small. Ellie reached over to squeeze his hand. "Just routine business, honey. Nothing to worry about." But there was plenty to worry about, and they all knew it. The bank had made it clear that this was her last extension. Either she came up with a substantial payment by the end of the month, or foreclosure proceedings would begin in earnest. After breakfast, James insisted on helping with the dishes while Ellie checked her email on the ancient desktop computer. In what had once been Thomas's office, there was nothing from the potential buyer she'd been negotiating with, but a message from her sister caught her attention. "Hey sis, just checking in. How are things at the farm? Mom's worried about you. No surprise there. Call when you can. Love, Kate." Ellie sighed. Her relationship with her family had been strained since Thomas's death. They meant well, but their constant suggestions that she sell the farm and move to the city with Sammy wore on her. They didn't understand what the land meant to her. Not just a business, but a legacy, a connection to Thomas that she wasn't ready to sever. "Everything okay?" James asked from the doorway, startling her. "Just family stuff," Ellie said, closing the email. "My sister checking in." James nodded, not pushing for details. "I should call my colleague about the meeting tomorrow." "Is there a spot on the property with better cell reception?" "Try the hill behind the barn," Ellie suggested. "It's about the only place that gets a decent signal." As James left to make his call, Ellie found herself staring at the desk, at the empty space where Thomas's papers used to be. She'd cleared it all away after his death, unable to bear the constant reminder, but now she found herself wishing for his advice. What would he do in her situation? Keep fighting against increasingly impossible odds? Or accept reality and find a way to preserve what mattered most, even if it meant letting go of the land? The sound of Sammy's laughter drifted through the open window, pulling her from her thoughts. She looked out to see her son showing James the old tractor, the one Thomas had been restoring before his accident. It was unusual to see Sammy so animated with a stranger, especially a city businessman who likely knew nothing about farm equipment. Yet there was something about James that inspired trust. Maybe it was his genuine interest in their lives, or the way he spoke to Sammy as an equal rather than a child. Whatever it was, in the span of less than a day, he had somehow become more than just a stranded traveler they were helping. Ellie shook herself mentally. She was romanticizing the situation. James was a successful businessman from Boston with his own life and concerns. By tomorrow, he'd be back in his world of technology and corporate meetings, their farm just an interesting anecdote to share with colleagues. The morning passed quickly with the usual farm chores. James insisted on helping despite his injured ankle, which seemed to be improving. He wasn't skilled at agricultural tasks, but he was willing and followed instructions well. By midday, they had accomplished more than Ellie usually managed on her own, and she found herself grateful for the extra pair of hands, however temporary. Lunch was a simple affair of sandwiches eaten at the kitchen table, with Sammy chattering about the science behind heirloom corn varieties. James listened attentively, asking questions that showed genuine interest rather than polite tolerance. "You know," he said during a lull in the conversation, "I think your specialty corn operation has significant potential. The market for authentic, heritage food products is growing exponentially in urban areas." "That's what Thomas always said," Ellie replied. "But scaling up requires capital, and banks aren't exactly lining up to lend money to small farms these days, especially ones behind on their existing loans. Have you considered alternative funding sources? Crowdfunding, angel investors, agricultural grants?" "We've looked into grants," Ellie admitted, "but most require matching funds or are designed for much larger operations. And I don't exactly have a network of angel investors on speed dial." James smiled at that. "Fair point. Though you might be surprised at the interest in sustainable agriculture among certain investor circles. It's become somewhat trendy to support small-scale farming operations, especially ones with an authentic story behind them." "Our story is pretty simple," Ellie said. "Fifth-generation farm trying to survive in an era of corporate agriculture and climate change." "That's exactly the kind of narrative that resonates," James insisted. "Authenticity is rare and valuable in today's market." The conversation was interrupted by the ringing of Ellie's cell phone. It was Matt from the garage. "Mrs. Sutton, is that fella still with you? The one with the broken-down car?" "Yes, he's right here," Ellie said, handing the phone to James. The conversation was brief and largely one-sided, with James listening more than speaking. When he hung up, his expression was resigned. "Bad news, I'm afraid. My car needs a part that has to be ordered from the distributor. It won't arrive until Thursday at the earliest." "So much for making your meeting tomorrow," Ellie said sympathetically. James nodded. "I've already spoken with my colleague. She'll represent our interests at the initial meeting, but I'll need to be there for the final negotiations later this week." He hesitated, then added, "I hate to impose further, but would it be possible for me to stay until my car is repaired? I'm happy to compensate you for the inconvenience." "There's no need for compensation," Ellie said firmly. "The guest room is yours for as long as you need it." "At least let me contribute to expenses and meals," James insisted. "And I'm more than willing to help around the farm in exchange for your hospitality." Before Ellie could respond, Sammy interjected. "You could help me with the irrigation pipes this afternoon. They need to be moved to the west field." "Sammy," Ellie admonished gently, "Mr. Harrington is our guest, not free labor." "I'd be happy to help," James said, "though I can't promise to be particularly skilled at farm work." "It's mostly just carrying pipes and connecting them," Sammy assured him. "Even city people can handle that." "Sammy!" Ellie exclaimed, embarrassed by her son's bluntness. James laughed. "He's not wrong. My agricultural skills are definitely limited compared to my technological ones." The matter settled, they finished lunch and prepared for the afternoon's tasks. Ellie needed to drive into town for her meeting with the bank manager, while Sammy and James would work on the irrigation system. As Ellie changed into her one-business outfit, a modest navy blue dress that had seen better days, she found herself worrying about leaving Sammy alone with James, not because she distrusted their guest, but because she hated the thought of Sammy becoming attached to someone who would be gone from their lives in a matter of days. Downstairs, she found James in the living room, his briefcase open on the coffee table as he sorted through some papers. "I'm heading out now," she said. "Are you sure you're okay with helping Sammy this afternoon? Your ankle is much better." "Today," James assured her, "and I'm genuinely happy to help. It's the least I can do after your kindness." Ellie nodded, still hesitant. Sammy can get very focused on projects. If he starts talking too much about corn genetics or irrigation efficiency, just tell him you need a break. James smiled. I find his enthusiasm refreshing, actually. Most adults I know aren't passionate about anything beyond their stock portfolios. Well, emergency numbers are on the fridge, and cell reception is best on the hill behind the barn. As I mentioned, we'll be fine, James said gently. Good luck with your meeting. The drive into town gave Ellie time to organize her thoughts. The meeting with the bank manager was crucial, her last chance to negotiate an extension on the loan. She had prepared a detailed plan for repayment, contingent on the sale of their specialty corn crop and some equipment they could spare. It wasn't much, but it was all she had to offer. Millridge looked different in the afternoon light, the empty storefronts and faded signs more prominent. The drought had affected everyone in the county, not just the farmers. Businesses that relied on agricultural dollars were struggling, creating a downward spiral that had hollowed out the once vibrant community. The Millridge County Bank occupied a solid brick building on the main street, its facade recently renovated despite the economic downturn, or perhaps because of it, as foreclosures had become a significant part of their business. Inside, the air conditioning was set to an uncomfortable chill, perhaps to discourage lingering. Ellie approached the receptionist, who directed her to wait for Mr. Atkins, the loan manager. She sat in one of the stiff chairs, trying not to fidget as she rehearsed her presentation mentally. After 15 minutes during which she watched 3 employees pass by without acknowledging her, Mr. Atkins finally emerged from his office. He was younger than Ellie by at least a decade, with the polished appearance of someone who had never worked outdoors a day in his life. "Mrs. Sutton," he said, his tone professionally pleasant but distant. "Please come in." His office was immaculate, with certificates and awards displayed prominently on the walls. No personal photos were visible, only corporate achievements and recognitions. "Thank you for meeting with me," Ellie began once they were seated. "I've prepared a detailed repayment plan that I believe addresses the bank's concerns while allowing us to maintain operations." She handed him the folder she had prepared, watching as he flipped through it with barely concealed impatience. "Mrs. Sutton," he said finally, closing the folder without having read it thoroughly, "we've had this conversation several times already. The bank has been more than accommodating with extensions and modifications to your loan terms. But at some point, we need to see actual progress, not just plans and promises." "This plan includes confirmed sales," Ellie countered, trying to keep her voice steady. "We have a buyer interested in our specialty corn crop. The agreement should be finalized by the end of the week." "Should be isn't the same as is," Mr. Atkins pointed out. "And even if this sale goes through as projected, which, forgive me, I find optimistic given the current market conditions, it still falls significantly short of the amount needed to bring your loan current." "It's a start," Ellie insisted. "And with the changes we're implementing, including more efficient irrigation and expanded specialty crop production, we'll be in a stronger position next quarter." Mr. Atkins sighed, adopting the expression of someone forced to deliver unpleasant news to a person who refused to understand reality. "Mrs. Sutton, I respect your determination. I truly do, but the board has made its decision. Without a substantial payment by the end of the month, substantially more than what your projected sale would provide, we will have no choice but to begin foreclosure proceedings." The words hit Ellie like physical blows, though she had been half expecting them. Still, hearing it stated so definitively made the threat real in a way it hadn't been before. "Is there nothing else I can do?" she asked, hating the pleading note that had crept into her voice. "You could consider selling a portion of the property," Mr. Atkins suggested, not unkindly. "The eastern acreage particularly would be attractive to developers given its proximity to the highway. That would generate enough capital to clear the debt and give you a fresh start with the remaining land." "That land has been in my husband's family for generations," Ellie said. "I can't just sell it off in pieces." "Then I'm afraid your options are limited," Mr. Atkins said, standing to indicate the meeting was over. "I wish I had better news for you, Mrs. Sutton." Ellie left the bank feeling numb. She had known this was coming, had been preparing for it mentally for months, but the reality was still devastating. The thought of losing the farm, Thomas's legacy, Sammy's inheritance, her home for the past 15 years was almost too painful to contemplate. She walked down the main street in a daze, barely registering the familiar storefronts and the occasional greeting from townsfolk. Her mind raced with calculations and possibilities, each more desperate than the last. Could she sell the tractor? Take out a personal loan? Ask her sister for help, despite knowing Kate's savings were earmarked for her twins' college fund? Lost in thought, she nearly collided with Sheriff Mendez outside the hardware store. "Whoa there, Ellie," he said, steadying her with a hand on her arm. "You okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." Ellie forced a smile. "Just thinking about farm stuff." "Sorry, Sheriff. No need to apologize. And how many times do I have to tell you to call me Ricardo? We've known each other since high school." "Old habits," Ellie said with a weak laugh. "How's Maria doing with the baby?" "Growing like a weed," the sheriff replied, his face lighting up at the mention of his grandson. 7 months old and already trying to crawl. "Maria says he's going to be an athlete." They chatted for a few more minutes, the familiar conversation providing a welcome distraction from Ellie's financial worries. As they were about to part ways, the sheriff mentioned something that caught her attention. "By the way, you haven't had any unusual visitors out at your place, have you? Why do you ask?" Ellie said, immediately thinking of James. "Nothing serious," Sheriff Mendez assured her. "Just had a report of someone asking directions to farms in the area yesterday. Probably a salesman or something, but thought I'd check. Actually, we do have a visitor," Ellie admitted. "A businessman whose car broke down near our property. He's staying with us until it's repaired." The sheriff raised an eyebrow. "That's mighty hospitable of you. He give a name?" "James Harrington. He's from Boston, owns a tech company." Sheriff Mendez nodded slowly. "Well, just be careful. We don't get many strangers around here, especially not tech executives from Boston." "He seems harmless enough," Ellie said, though a seed of doubt had been planted. "But I appreciate the concern." As she drove back to the farm, Ellie found herself reconsidering James's presence. He had appeared in their lives so suddenly, and there was something almost too perfect about his story: the broken-down car, the important meeting, the injured ankle that made him appear vulnerable. But what possible ulterior motive could he have? The farm was barely staying afloat. There was nothing of value to steal, except maybe some farm equipment, which would be nearly impossible to transport without being noticed. And his clothes, his watch, his manner all suggested he was exactly what he claimed to be: a successful businessman temporarily stranded in farm country. Still, the sheriff's question had unsettled her. In a small community like Mill Ridge, strangers were rare and often viewed with suspicion. Had she been too trusting, too quick to offer hospitality to someone she knew nothing about beyond his own account of himself? As she turned onto the dirt road leading to the farm, Ellie resolved to be more cautious, to observe James more carefully for any sign that he wasn't what he seemed. Sammy's safety had to be her priority, even if it meant appearing less hospitable than before. The sight that greeted her as she pulled up to the house banished these concerns temporarily. Sammy and James were seated on the porch steps, heads bent together over what appeared to be James's laptop. They were so engrossed in whatever they were viewing that they didn't notice her arrival until she was halfway up the path. "Mom!" Sammy called, his face alight with excitement. "Mr. Harrington's been showing me how to make a website for our farm. It's got pictures and everything." "A website?" Ellie repeated, confused. "What for?" "For direct sales," James explained, standing to greet her. "Sammy was telling me about your specialty corn varieties, and it occurred to me that with the right online presence, You could potentially reach customers directly, eliminating the middleman and increasing your profit margins. That sounds complicated, Ellie said cautiously. Not at all, James assured her. The basic structure is quite simple. Sammy's already designed most of the layout, and we've uploaded some photographs he took of the farm and the corn varieties. It's quite impressive, actually. Ellie looked at her son, surprised. You took photographs of the corn? Sammy nodded enthusiastically. Dad showed me how to use his old camera last summer, remember? I've been documenting the different varieties. Mr. Harrington says it's important for customers to see what makes our corn special. The mention of Thomas didn't bring the usual pang of sadness, perhaps because it was connected to Sammy's excitement rather than his loss. Ellie found herself curious despite her lingering doubts about James. May I see this website? They showed her what they had created, a simple but professional-looking site with a clean design and beautiful photographs of the farm and their specialty corn varieties. There was a section about the farm's history, another detailing the unique characteristics of each corn variety, and a simple ordering form. It's just a mock-up at this stage, James explained. But with a few refinements, it could be a powerful marketing tool. The direct-to-consumer model has been extremely successful for specialty food producers in recent years. But how would we handle shipping, payment processing? All of that requires infrastructure we don't have, Ellie pointed out. There are third-party services that can handle most of that for a reasonable fee, James said. And you could start small, maybe focusing on local delivery or pickup for nearby customers, then expand as demand grows. The idea was appealing, a potential lifeline she hadn't considered. But it also seemed far-fetched, a digital solution to a very analog problem. It's certainly interesting, she said noncommittally. How did the irrigation work go? All done, Sammy reported proudly. Mr. Harrington helped me move the pipes, and we even fixed that leak in the connector that's been bothering you. You fixed the leak? Ellie asked, surprised. The connector had been a persistent problem that she hadn't had time to address. James shrugged modestly. I may not know much about farming, but I do know a bit about mechanical connections. It was just a matter of finding the right washer to create a proper seal. Ellie found herself smiling despite her earlier misgivings. Whatever her concerns about James's sudden appearance in their lives, he had undeniably been helpful, and his presence had brought out a side of Sammy she hadn't seen in far too long. Thank you, she said sincerely. Both of you. The irrigation system has been on my to-do list for weeks. Happy to help, James said, his warm smile making something flutter in Ellie's chest, a feeling she quickly suppressed. How was your meeting at the bank? The reminder of her failed negotiation dampened her mood immediately. Not great, she admitted. They're not willing to extend the loan any further without a substantial payment, which we don't have. I'm sorry to hear that, James said, his expression genuinely sympathetic. Is there anything I can do to help? Unless you happen to have a spare $50,000 lying around, I'm afraid not, Ellie said with a forced laugh. James's expression turned thoughtful, but before he could respond, Sammy interjected. Mom, can I show Mr. Harrington Dad's special cornfield before dinner? The sunset light makes the colors really pop. Sure, honey, Ellie agreed, grateful for the change of subject. I'll start dinner. We're having your favorite chicken and dumplings. As Sammy led James toward the small experimental plot where Thomas had developed his most promising corn varieties, Ellie watched them go with mixed emotions. James had brought a spark back to Sammy's eyes, an enthusiasm she hadn't seen since before Thomas's death. For that alone, she was grateful, whatever his true story might be. Inside the kitchen, as she prepared dinner, Ellie found herself thinking about James's briefcase. He kept it close at all times, even taking it with him on their tour of the farm, What was in it that required such constant vigilance? Business documents for his important meeting, presumably. But was there something more? The sheriff's warning echoed in her mind, mixing with her own financial worries and the strange coincidence of James's appearance just when they were at their most vulnerable. Was she being paranoid, or was there something about James Harrington that didn't quite add up? Dinner was a quiet affair, with Sammy doing most of the talking as he described the specialty cornfield to James in meticulous detail. Ellie observed their interaction, noting how attentively James listened, asking questions that showed genuine interest rather than polite tolerance. There was something almost paternal in his manner, a quality that both warmed and worried her. The last thing Sammy needed was to form an attachment to someone who would disappear from their lives in a matter of days. The purple corn has the highest anthocyanin content, Sammy was explaining, his fork gesturing enthusiastically. Dad said that makes it more nutritious. Plus chefs love the color for presentation. Fascinating, James replied, and he actually seemed to mean it. Have you considered marketing it specifically to high-end restaurants? The visual appeal alone would command a premium price. That was Thomas's plan, Ellie interjected. He had started building relationships with several restaurants in Chicago before. She trailed off, the familiar ache returning. Anyway, maintaining those connections long distance has been challenging. Understandable, James said. The restaurant industry runs on personal relationships and consistency of supply, both difficult to manage from a distance. Dad was going to hire a sales rep, Sammy added. Someone who could visit the restaurants regularly and bring samples. But then the accident happened. An uncomfortable silence fell over the table. Thomas's death, a tractor rollover on a steep section of the eastern field, was still difficult to discuss, even after 18 months. Your father sounds like he was a visionary, James said gently. Ahead of his time in recognizing the market potential for heritage crops. He was, Ellie agreed, grateful for the way James had acknowledged Thomas without dwelling on his absence. He always said farming wasn't just about growing food, but about preserving agricultural diversity for future generations. A noble purpose, James observed, and one increasingly recognized as essential in a world of diminishing biodiversity. The conversation shifted to lighter topics as they finished their meal. James complimented Ellie's cooking effusively, claiming that chicken and dumplings were better than anything he'd eaten in Boston's finest restaurants. The praise felt genuine rather than flattering, bringing a flush of pleasure to Ellie's cheeks that she hoped wasn't noticeable in the kitchen's warm light. After dinner, as Ellie was washing dishes and Sammy was showing James his collection of agricultural books, the landline rang. Few people called on that line anymore. Most used her cell phone, so the sound was jarring in the quiet house. Drying. Her hands quickly, Ellie answered. Sutton Farm. St. Louis is east of here, Ellie pointed out. You said you were heading to Chicago, James grimaced. Another lie, I'm afraid. I needed a plausible destination in case anyone was tracking my movements. I've been taking back roads, staying off major highways, trying to avoid detection. That's how I ended up on that rural road where you found me. And your car really did break down? That wasn't part of your cover story? Complete coincidence, I assure you. And spectacularly bad timing, given my situation. Ellie absorbed this information, trying to determine its veracity. The story was elaborate but coherent. It explained James's nervousness, his protectiveness over the briefcase, his presence on a remote county road. But it still required a significant leap of faith. I want to believe you, she said finally. But you understand why I might be skeptical. Completely, James agreed. In your position, I'd be equally cautious. But consider this, if I were truly a dangerous criminal, why would I have stayed? I could have stolen your truck last night and been hundreds of miles away by now. It was a fair point. Nothing in James's behavior suggested someone intent on harm. Quite the opposite, he'd been helpful, respectful, and kind, particularly to Sammy. "If what you're saying is true," Ellie said, "then these people, this corporation, they're still looking for you. And now you've involved us in whatever this is." James's expression grew troubled. "That's precisely why I was leaving tonight. The longer I stay, the greater the risk of them tracking me here. I've already put you and Sammy in potential danger, and that's unforgivable after the kindness you've shown me. Where would you even go? On foot, in the middle of the night? There's a bus station in the next county. If I start walking now, I could reach it by dawn." "That's 30 miles away," Ellie said incredulously. "With an injured ankle." "I don't have many options," James replied grimly. Ellie found herself at a crossroads. If James was telling the truth, he was a victim fleeing powerful enemies, not a threat. But if he was lying, allowing him to stay could endanger Sammy. The detective's warning echoed in her mind, but so did her own observations of James's character over the past day and a half. "The police will be here in the morning," she said, watching his reaction carefully. James paled visibly. "Then I definitely need to leave now. If they're working with the corporation, they won't simply arrest me. They'll take the evidence, and anything I've uncovered will disappear." His fear seemed genuine, not the calculated response of someone constructing a lie. And there was something about his story that resonated with Ellie's own experiences of being outmaneuvered by powerful institutions, of fighting against forces that seemed overwhelming in their resources and influence. "What's on the laptop?" she asked suddenly. "The evidence you mentioned." James hesitated, then opened the briefcase, revealing a sleek laptop. Financial records, emails, surveillance data. Proof that this corporation has been systematically targeting smaller tech companies, stealing their intellectual property, then either forcing them out of business or acquiring them at devalued prices. "Show me," Ellie insisted. After a moment's consideration, James nodded. He opened the laptop, entered a complex password, and turned the screen toward her. What Ellie saw was beyond her technical understanding: spreadsheets, email chains, code sequences, but the pattern was clear enough. Multiple small companies targeted over years, their innovations stolen, their businesses undermined. Sammy nodded, his expression solemn. He said, "The most important things usually are difficult." "Your father sounds like he was a wise man," James observed quietly. "He was," Ellie confirmed. "Not perfect, he could be stubborn to a fault, and he worried too much about things he couldn't control. But he understood what mattered." The conversation lapsed into comfortable silence as they continued down the highway. The landscape gradually changed from the open farmland of Millridge County to more varied terrain stands of trees, small lakes, and eventually the outskirts of Riversend, a town substantially larger than Millridge, though still modest by urban standards. As they approached the town limits, Ellie's phone rang. The screen displayed Sheriff Mendez. "That's the sheriff from Millridge," she explained to James, tension evident in her voice. "Should I answer?" James hesitated, then nodded. Better to maintain normalcy. He might be calling about something unrelated, and ignoring him could raise suspicion. Ellie connected the call through the truck's Bluetooth system. "Morning, Ricardo. Everything okay?" "That's what I was calling to ask you," the sheriff replied, his tone casual but with an undercurrent of concern. "Got a call from some detective in Chicago asking about your visitor. Thought I should check in." Ellie's knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. "We're fine. Just headed into Riversend for some supplies and to check on Mr. Harrington's car situation." "This detective seemed pretty interested in your guest," Sheriff Mendez continued. "Wouldn't give me many details, but implied it was a serious matter. You sure everything's all right out there?" "Absolutely," Ellie said, striving to keep her voice steady. "Mr. Harrington has been a perfect gentleman." Helped Sammy with the irrigation pipes yesterday. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Well, just be careful, okay? I've known you since high school, Ellie. If you need anything at all, you call me directly, not some out-of-state detective. The genuine concern in his voice made Ellie's chest tighten with guilt over her deception. I appreciate that, Ricardo. Truly, after ending the call, Ellie exhaled slowly. He knows something's not right. But he didn't try to stop us, James pointed out. That suggests he trusts your judgment more than some detective's suspicions. Ricardo's good people, Ellie agreed. Known him all my life. But it means the detective is actively reaching out to local law enforcement. We need to move quickly. Riversend's main street was beginning to show signs of morning activity as they drove through the town. Center shopkeepers raising shutters, early customers entering the local cafe. Postal workers sorting mail on the steps of the brick post office building. The bus station was located on the eastern edge of town, a modest single-story structure with a small parking lot. Ellie pulled into the lot and parked near the entrance. I'll go in and check the schedule, make sure nothing's changed. I'll come with you, James said, gathering his briefcase. Sammy, you mind waiting here for a minute? Can I come too? Sammy asked. I promise I won't get in the way. Ellie exchanged a glance with James before nodding. Sure, honey, let's all go. The bus station was nearly empty, with just a sleepy-looking attendant behind the ticket counter, and an elderly couple seated on a bench, surrounded by luggage. Ellie approached the counter, aware of James and Sammy hovering nearby. Good morning, she greeted the attendant. I'm checking on the 9:30 bus to St. Louis. Is it running on schedule? The young man consulted his computer screen. Yes, ma'am, on time so far. You looking to purchase a ticket? Please, James interjected, stepping forward and producing his wallet. One way to St. Louis. As James completed the transaction, Ellie noticed Sammy wandering toward the large schedule board mounted on the wall. He was studying it intently, his expression thoughtful. Everything okay, honey? She asked, joining him. Just looking at all the places the buses go, Sammy replied. Have you ever been to St. Louis, Mom? Once, a long time ago. Your dad. And I went for an agricultural conference before you were born. Did you like it? Ellie smiled at the memory. It was interesting. Different from what we're used to. Lots of people, lots of noise, but exciting too. There's a famous arch there. That's really impressive. Maybe we could visit sometime, Sammy suggested. After the farm is okay again. The innocent hope in his voice squeezed Ellie's heart. Despite everything, Sammy still believed things would improve, that their situation was temporary rather than terminal. His faith was both beautiful and heartbreaking. Maybe we could, she agreed, unwilling to challenge his optimism. James joined them, ticket in hand. All set. Bus leaves in about an hour and 20 minutes. Perfect, Ellie sighed. That gives us time to grab some breakfast. There's a good diner across the street. As they exited the bus station, Ellie scanned the parking lot, that now familiar caution making her alert for anything unusual. Nothing seemed out of place, just a few cars, presumably belonging to other passengers or staff. The diner across the street was a local institution, its windows steamed from the heat of the kitchen, the aroma of coffee and bacon wafting out each time the door opened. Inside, they found a booth near the back, away from the windows, but with a clear view of the entrance. Old habits, James explained with a wry smile as he positioned himself facing the door, though in this case, probably justified. A waitress approached, notepad ready. Morning, folks. What can I get you? They ordered pancakes for Sammy, eggs and toast for Ellie, coffee, and a breakfast sandwich for James. As the waitress departed, Ellie noticed James checking his phone again, his brow furrowed. Problem? She asked quietly. Maybe, he replied, turning the phone so she could see the screen. It displayed a news article with the headline, Tech CEO sought for questioning in corporate espionage case. Ellie's stomach dropped as she scanned the brief article. It named James directly, described him as a person of interest in an ongoing investigation, and quoted a spokesperson for Meridian Global, presumably the corporation James had mentioned, expressing grave concern about stolen proprietary information. "They're getting ahead of the story," James said grimly, "painting me as the villain before I can expose them. Will it work?" Ellie asked. "It might, at least in the short term. They have resources, connections, credibility in certain circles. Once the evidence is public, the narrative should shift, but until then—" "You're the bad guy," Sammy finished, having leaned over to read the article. "But that's not fair. You're trying to stop them from stealing from other companies." "Life isn't always fair," James repeated his earlier observation, though this time with a hint of a smile. "But truth has a way of emerging eventually. That's what I'm counting on." Their food arrived, temporarily diverting the conversation to lighter topics. Sammy enthusiastically described his school's upcoming science fair to James, who offered suggestions for his project on drought-resistant crops. Ellie watched their interaction, struck again by how natural it seemed, how easily James had slipped into their lives as if he belonged there. As they were finishing their meal, the diner's door opened, admitting a tall man in a dark suit. Something about his demeanor, the way he surveyed the room, the deliberate casualness of his movements, triggered Ellie's internal alarm. James had noticed too. She could tell by the subtle tensing of his shoulders. "We should go," James said, quietly, not looking directly at the newcomer. "Now." Ellie nodded, signaling for the check. The man in the suit had taken a seat at the counter, but his attention seemed focused on their booth, though he was careful not to stare openly. "Is that one of the bad guys?" Sammy whispered, his eyes wide. "We don't know for sure," Ellie replied. "Honestly, but better safe than sorry." The waitress brought their check, which Ellie paid quickly in cash. They rose to leave, moving with deliberate normalcy toward the exit. As they passed the counter, the man in the suit turned slightly, making brief but unmistakable eye contact with James. A flicker of recognition passed between them. Outside, Ellie took Sammy's hand firmly in hers. "Walk normally," she instructed. Under her breath, "Don't run. Don't look back." They crossed the street toward the bus station, maintaining a casual pace despite the urgency Ellie felt building within her. Behind them, the diner's door opened again. "He's following us, James," confirmed, his voice low, but staying at a distance. "Why doesn't he just approach us?" Ellie wondered. "He's probably waiting for backup," James theorized. "Or confirming my identity before making a move." They entered the bus station, which had grown busier in their absence. Several passengers now occupied the waiting area, their luggage gathered around them. The elderly couple from earlier remained in their spot, now sharing sections of a newspaper. "The bus doesn't leave for almost an hour," Ellie observed, anxiety creeping into her voice. "What do we do?" James considered their options, his expression grim. "I need to get out of sight, somewhere I can observe without being observed." "The restrooms are in the back," Sammy suggested helpfully. "There's a janitor's closet next to them. I saw it when we were here before." James raised an eyebrow, impressed by the boy's observation skills. "That could work. If I can get in there without being seen, I might be able to wait until boarding time." "I'll create a distraction," Ellie decided. "Something to draw attention away from you." Before James could protest, Ellie moved toward the center of the waiting area, deliberately tripping over an imaginary obstacle. She fell forward with a convincing cry of pain, landing hard enough to draw gasps from nearby passengers. "My ankle!" she exclaimed, clutching at her leg dramatically. "I think it's sprained." The commotion had the desired effect. Passengers and station staff converged on Ellie, offering assistance and concern. In the confusion, James slipped away toward the back of the station, Sammy following close behind to show him the janitor's closet. Through the small crowd gathering around her, Ellie caught a glimpse of the man in the suit entering the station. The dirt road stretched ahead, empty and familiar. No vehicles waited at their gate, no figures stood on their porch. The farm looked exactly as they had left it, peaceful in the late morning sun. "Looks clear," Ellie observed cautiously. "Maybe. They don't know where we live," Sammy suggested. "Maybe," Ellie agreed, though she doubted it was that simple. More likely, the focus had shifted to intercepting James before he reached St. Louis, rather than questioning those who had helped him along the way. As they pulled up to the house, Ellie noticed something on the front porch, a package that hadn't been there when they left. She approached it cautiously, half expecting some form of retaliation, but found only a plain manila envelope with her name written on it in unfamiliar handwriting. Inside the house, with doors locked behind them, Ellie opened the envelope. It contained a brief note and another, smaller envelope. "Eleanor," the note read, "in case things don't go as planned, I wanted to ensure you and Sammy were protected. The enclosed envelope contains something that might help with your farm situation. Consider it thanks for your extraordinary kindness to a stranger in need. With deepest gratitude, J.H." The smaller envelope contained a lottery ticket, one of those multi-state games with enormous jackpots. Attached to it was a sticky note with a series of numbers written in the same handwriting. "Winning numbers for tomorrow's drawing. The evidence isn't the only thing I acquired from Meridian Global. Their predictive algorithms have other applications." Ellie stared at the ticket, dumbfounded. Was James suggesting that this ticket would win tomorrow's lottery? That seemed impossible, beyond the realm of probability or prediction. And yet, if his company had developed algorithms sophisticated enough to predict consumer behavior, and if Meridian Global had enhanced those capabilities. "What is it, Mom?" Sammy asked, peering over her shoulder. "I'm not entirely sure," Ellie replied honestly. "But I think Mr. Harrington left us a gift." The rest of the day passed in a strange limbo of anticipation and concern. Ellie kept the news on, searching for any mention of James or Meridian Global. By evening, the story had evolved. Reports now described an ongoing investigation into alleged corporate espionage, with unnamed sources suggesting that significant evidence had been turned over to federal authorities. "Do you think he made it?" Sammy asked as they watched the news coverage. "Do you think he got the evidence to his journalist friend?" "I think he did," Ellie said, surprising herself with her certainty. "James struck me as someone who accomplishes what he sets out to do, no matter the obstacles." That night, as Sammy slept, Ellie sat on the porch, contemplating the lottery ticket and all it represented. If it truly was a winning ticket, and that remained an enormous if, it could solve their financial problems instantly. The farm would be saved, their debts cleared, Sammy's future secured. But more significant than the potential windfall was what the day's events had awakened in Ellie. For too long, she had seen herself as a victim of circumstances, the drought, the bank's pressure, the loss of Thomas. Today, she had chosen action over resignation, courage over caution. She had made a difference, not just for James, but for herself and for Sammy. Whatever happened with the lottery ticket, that transformation couldn't be taken away. The next evening, they sat together in the living room, watching the lottery drawing on television. Ellie had never purchased a lottery ticket before, had always considered it a tax on hope, a game for those who didn't understand probability. Yet here she was, clutching a ticket that might or might not represent salvation. And tonight's winning numbers are... The announcer's voice filled the room as the numbered balls tumbled in their transparent chamber. One by one, the numbers were called. One by one, they matched the numbers on their ticket. 6 numbers in perfect sequence, defying astronomical odds. "Mom," Sammy whispered, his eyes wide with disbelief, "we won. We actually won." Ellie stared at the ticket, then at the television, then back at the ticket. It seemed impossible, and yet the evidence was undeniable. The algorithms had worked. James had given them more than just a winning lottery ticket. He had given them a future. In the days that followed, their lives transformed with dizzying speed. The Lottery Corporation verified their win-a jackpot of $87 million, which they opted to take as a lump sum payment of $42 million after taxes. The bank that had been so eager to foreclose now courted them aggressively, offering wealth management services and preferential rates. Neighbors who had regarded them with pity now approached with congratulations and occasionally requests for loans or investments. Through it all, Ellie maintained a clear vision of what mattered. The farm would stay in the family, modernized with sustainable infrastructure, but preserving its essential character. Sammy's education would be secured through a trust fund, and a significant portion of their windfall would be dedicated to helping other small farmers in the region, establishing a foundation to provide low-interest loans and grants for sustainable agriculture projects. 1 month after their life-changing morning, as Ellie sat on the porch watching the sunset, a familiar figure appeared at the end of their driveway. James Harrington, looking more rested and relaxed than when they'd last seen him, walked toward the house with an easy stride. "You came back," Ellie said, rising to greet him. "I promised myself I would," James replied, his smile warm. "Once things were settled." "And are they? Settled, I mean?" James nodded. "Largely. The evidence was compelling enough that federal authorities couldn't ignore it. Meridian Global's leadership is facing multiple indictments. Their stock has plummeted, and their victims are filing civil suits that will likely result in substantial settlements." "And you?" "Cleared of all accusations," James said with visible satisfaction. "My company's reputation has actually improved, thanks to our stand against corporate espionage. We've had offers of investment that would allow us to expand our original mission, helping small businesses compete more effectively." Ellie smiled. "I'm glad. You took an enormous risk." "As did you," James pointed out. "You could have called that detective back, turned me in. Instead, you chose to help a stranger based on nothing but instinct and a belief in doing what's right." "Speaking of helping," Ellie said, producing the lottery ticket from her pocket. "This was quite a thank you gift." James had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. "Ah, yes, that. I hope you don't mind." The algorithms were originally designed to identify patterns in seemingly random data sets. Lottery numbers, it turns out, aren't as random as they appear. "It's changed our lives," Ellie admitted. "But not in the ways you might expect. Yes, the farm is secure now, and Sammy's future is provided for. But the most important change was what happened before we even knew about the ticket, when we chose to help you despite the risks. Courage often works that way," James observed. "The act itself transforms us more than the outcome." They sat together on the porch as dusk settled over the farm, comfortable in a silence born of shared experience and mutual respect. Sammy joined them, his excitement at seeing James again obvious in his animated conversation about the farm's future plans. As night fell fully, stars appearing in a velvet sky untainted by city lights, Ellie reflected on the extraordinary journey that had begun with a simple act of kindness on a dusty country road. She had stopped for a stranger when others passed him by, an echo of the Good Samaritan parable she'd learned in childhood. That decision, made from instinct rather than calculation, had set in motion a sequence of events that transformed not just their financial circumstances, but their understanding of what was possible when courage overcame caution. The briefcase James had guarded so carefully had indeed contained something valuable, not just evidence of corporate wrongdoing, but a reminder that individual actions matter, that standing against seemingly insurmountable odds isn't futile, that integrity has power beyond institutional influence or financial resources. "Will you stay a while?" Ellie asked as the evening deepened around them. Sammy would love to show you the improvements we're making to the irrigation system. James smiled, his expression suggesting he understood the invitation extended beyond farm infrastructure. "I'd like that very much," he replied. "I find I'm in no particular hurry to get back to Boston." Under the vast canopy of stars, with the land stretching dark and fertile around them, something new began to take root, a connection born of shared purpose and mutual respect, a potential future. Neither could have imagined just weeks before. The lottery ticket had provided financial security, but the true prize had been won long before those numbered balls tumbled into place, when a single mother farmer had chosen kindness over suspicion, courage over fear, action over resignation. In that moment, she had reclaimed not just her farm, but her agency, her strength, and her belief in possibilities beyond the horizon. As Sammy chattered excitedly about their plans for expanding the specialty corn operation, Ellie caught James watching her, his expression reflecting something she was beginning to feel herself, that some journeys, once begun, continue long after the initial destination is reached. That sometimes the most valuable things we find are those we weren't looking for at all. The farm that had seemed a burden, a responsibility too heavy to bear alone, now represented possibility rather than limitation. The future, which had loomed with such uncertainty and dread, now stretched before them, rich with potential. And it had all begun with the simple decision to stop when others drove past, to see a person in need rather than a problem to avoid. In that choice, ordinary yet extraordinary, lay the true winning ticket, one whose value no lottery could match. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.